Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, we're now going to make a start on session number 4. We will then probably pause for one more further break, and then afterwards we will have the final session, which will basically take us till 7 o'clock and Asr.
Somebody was telling us that it will finish at 6 o'clock. You misinformed us.
What did Sakib say yesterday?
Okay, Bobby.
Okay, now in session number 3, we were looking at how Ali anhu's role was during Abu Bakr anhu's Khilafat, how Ali anhu's role was during Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu's Khilafat. We're now going to move on and look at Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu's role during Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu's Khilafat. Now he goes on to explain that first and foremost, the Shias, and I touched on this in our last course on Uthman anhu, that the Shias, they made many lies and fabrications about Uthman anhu in terms of how he was chosen to be a Khalifa. That how he was chosen, many lies and many fabrications have been made. One of the fabrications they make is the Shia say that Abdurrahman bin Auf, and just to recap, I mentioned in Uthman anhu's course that when Umar anhu when he passed away, he made 6 Sahabas part of the Mashwara committee, the select committee, to select the next Khalifa. So Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was the one who was making the final decision. And he came up with the decision that the next Khalifa for the Muslims should be Uthman, not Ali. So Uthman was chosen. And the fabrication the Shias make is, Shias claim Abdurrahman bin Auf chose Uthman because he happened to be from the Banu Umayyah. In other words, Abdurrahman bin Auf is from the Banu Umayyah, and Uthman is from the Banu Umayyah. But if you remember from our last course, I didn't mention that Abdurrahman bin Auf is not from the Banu Umayyah. So that accusation that Abdurrahman chose his cousin, Hazrat Usman ibn Anhu, to be the next Khalifa, that is also, brothers and sisters, wrong. And another kind of subplot to it is that the Shias claim that Banu Umayyah and the Banu Hashim, they kind of disagreed, they kind of differed, they had ikhtilaf regarding choosing the next Khalifa. And again, brothers and sisters, that is also incorrect as well. There was no kind of disagreement. Unanimously, everyone agreed on Uthman anhu being the next Khalifa of Islam. Now, as I explained in the previous course, I don't want to repeat all the information again, but just the main parts so that we are able to understand the next slide, which is in front of us. Sayyidina Uthman anhu's khilafat lasted for 12 years. And the first 6 years, alhamdulillah, was very, very good. It was like Umar anhu's khilafat. Everyone together, unity, ittihad, no problems. Then the last 6 years of Uthman anhu's khilafat led to problems. Problems started. And then if you remember from the last course, I mentioned some points on this slide. Some causes of problems, some causes of fitna. So I mentioned that during Uthman anhu's time, many of these Sahabas had left Medina and they had migrated to other cities, other parts of the Islamic Empire. They went to Yemen, Misr, Egypt, Persia, Rome. I also mentioned that because the cream of the Sahabas were leaving this world, people who are now converting to Islam, they weren't that same caliber of people during the early period of Islam. Don't get me wrong, I think they probably would be many times better than us, but what I'm trying to explain is that they weren't the cream like the Sahabas were. So people, some of them were converting to Islam, but they still had that tribalism, nationalism, pride and fakhr and riyah inside them. So like one of the brothers has mentioned that, like certain clans, or like Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, so even though they are Muslims, but that nationalism still fires inside their belly. So that's what happened during Uthman anhu's time. The people from all parts of the world were converted to Islam, but there was still that nationalism, tribalism, certain parts of Jahiliyyat was still inside them. So then I went on to mention about this figure, about Abdullah bin Sabah. And I mentioned even during Uthman anhu's course that the Shias, they say that there was no such figure called Abdullah bin Sabah. That Uthman anhu being overruled and his khilafat coming to an end, the Shias look at it that, oh no, it was done by people from Medina who had enough of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But what I'm trying to explain is that the Shias say that Uthman anhu's khilafat coming to an end was because the people, the good people, the genuine Muslims, what the Shias say, the genuine Muslims had enough of Hazrat Uthman and they just overran him and they overturned the khilafah. But I mentioned in Uthman anhu's course that was far, far from the truth. Everybody, the Sahabas, they looked up to Hazrat Uthman anhu, and the reason for the toppling of Uthman anhu's khilafat was because of certain munafiqs, rebels, hypocrites, Khawarij, who kind of plotted and planned against the Amir al-Mu'mineen, against Hazrat Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And what was the plots, brothers and sisters? So again, we mentioned this in the previous course, that Abdullah bin Sabah, he went to various places like Egypt, Basra, Kufa, and he drummed up support. And the way he got support is that he made stories about Uthman. Oh, Uthman is being unjust. Uthman radiallahu anhu is appointing his relatives into high positions. We'll look at this later, that was never the case. So these allegations, brothers and sisters, were made. Uthman anhu, he dealt with these allegations. He explained to them that no, this is not the case, but even then they weren't having none of it. Now, if we have a look at the second paragraph, he explains that during the time of fitna here means these rebels taking control of Medina Munawwara, Ali radiallahu anhu, his level of dedication to Uthman radiallahu anhu was the same. In other words, in terms of listening and obeying the Imam. He listened to the Imam, he obeyed the Imam. His dedication, devotion to Uthman radiallahu anhu remained the same. And during the siege here refers to when the rebels surrounded Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu's house. So during the siege, brothers and sisters, Ali radiallahu anhu was the most defensive of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. In other words, he was willing to sacrifice everything and anything for Hazrat Uthman. He was willing to defend Hazrat Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And he sent a message to Hazrat Uthman that I have 500 armored men. I have 500 people, armored men. And if you give permission, so what I will do is that I will send these 500 men to go and wipe away all the rebels. To wipe away all the rebels. So what did Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu say, brothers and sisters? What did he respond? He said, I don't want a blood of a Muslim to be shed on my account. So he said, no, let them do whatever they want. And this is what Uthman radiallahu anhu allowed. They broke into his house and they martyred him. And explained how he was martyred in the previous course. Now, if we have a look at the next paragraph down, when the news of the martyrdom reached Ali radiallahu anhu, he said to his son, he was really angry. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is that if Ali radiallahu anhu hated Uthman radiallahu anhu, again as the Shias make it out to be, then I think Ali radiallahu anhu would have been rejoicing on or at Uthman radiallahu anhu's death. But there was none of this gloating, there was none of this kind of rejoicing. So he explains here that Ali radiallahu anhu, when he heard of Uthman radiallahu anhu's martyrdom, he said, how could they have killed Uthman? Like he said to his son, how could they have killed Uthman whilst you were manning the door? In other words, his two sons, Hassan and Hussein, they were the guards. They were outside protecting Uthman radiallahu anhu. They were outside on his front door protecting Uthman. I mentioned this in the previous course. But the rebels managed to somehow overpower them, get into the house and attack Hazrat Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So he goes on to explain that how could they have killed Uthman whilst you were manning the door? So he goes on to explain that Ali radiallahu anhu then slapped Hassan radiallahu anhu and also hit Hussein radiallahu anhu on the chest and angrily went to his house. Because Ali was so upset here that with his sons as Hassan and Hussein, that how did you allow these rebels to break into Usman's house and martyr him? You were supposed to be protecting him. So how on earth did you manage that? How on earth did you allow that to happen? How did you allow these rebels to go inside and martyr Usman? So as Ali became angry, what did he do, brothers and sisters? He slapped Hassan and hit Hussein radiallahu anhu, and he angrily went inside the house. So what we can understand here is, again, as I mentioned before, there was no kind of animosity between the two. Even when Uthman radiallahu anhu was chosen to be the Khalifa, there wasn't any kind of animosity between Ali and Uthman that why Uthman was chosen, why not me. He still showed that same level of dedication, devotion in helping and in assisting Hazrat Usman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Which then takes me on to the next point with regards to the pledge of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, or the election of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And this is something which you will find in your course book on page 14 and also on page 16. Now, in a nutshell, what I've just basically mentioned here is that when Usman radiallahu was martyred, Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu had no desire to be a Khalifa. He had no intention whatsoever to become a leader, especially after what happened. You know, if somebody got martyred, if the previous king got martyred, if the previous leader got martyred, the next in line will think twice before he steps into that position, fearing that the same may happen to me. So Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu had no desire whatsoever to be a Khalifa and a leader. But I mentioned this point before, brothers and sisters, that one thing is good for you to say that, okay, I don't want to be a leader or a Khalifa, but sometimes you need to look at the general public. You need to look at the masses. And sometimes you need to overwhelm your desires, what you want, for the benefit of others. Now, just say, for example, today I'm doing the course. I could easily have turned around and said to Brother Sajjad in the morning, "Oh, I don't want to come in today." I could have easily said that. But that is my desires taking over the needs of the people, because the people, they booked, they paid, all the food was brought in, you know, all the tables were done, everything was done, prepared. So now for me to cancel in the last minute would be very, very bad on my part, even though there may be a very valid reason. But for me to cancel and say no is very, very bad. Why? Because I'm following my own desires over the needs of the people. So similarly, Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, he didn't want to be a Khalifa. That was his desire. I don't want to get involved. But then he had to look at the people. And Medina Munawwara at that moment in time was in the state of anarchy. In other words, it's all over the place. There were rebels, insurgents everywhere. The need for a Khalifa was even more needed at that moment in time. People were looking for a leader and for some direction. Obviously, the rebels weren't providing any direction. They were causing more fitna. You know, the same way, that's why I said that Ali radiallahu anhu's life mirrors Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's life. Because when Rasulullah passed away, I won't say there was a state of anarchy, but there was definitely a state of confusion. What to do next? Prophet ﷺ passed away. Hum kya kare abhi? What do we do now? So there was a need for Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu to step up to Khilafat straight away. When Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu passed away, Umar radiallahu anhu's Khilafat, even though he was chosen more or less straight away, but even if there was a gap, it wouldn't have been a problem because everything was slowly getting settled. And after Umar radiallahu anhu's time, and as you know, it was 3 days later before they chose the Khilafah of Uthman, it was okay because Umar radiallahu anhu's Khilafat was settled. But Uthman radiallahu anhu's Khilafat, because it was like a martyrdom, he was attacked by the rebels, and Medina Munawwara was in a state of chaos. They required a Khalifa as soon as possible. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he gave up his own chahat, his own desires, his own personal needs, which was, I don't want to be the Khalifa, but because of the need of the people, he sacrificed his life, because remember, he was also martyred as well, for the betterment of the Muslims. So this is what Ali radiallahu anhu did. So he decided to take up the Khilafat. As I said before that, if you look at the next paragraph, after Uthman's martyrdom, Ali remained secluded in his house. He did not campaign or champion himself for the Khilafah. He didn't like go around and make campaigns and say, oh, I should be the next Khalifa. He wanted to do nothing, but because he was the most virtuous at that time, after Uthman, the next virtuous was Hazrat Ali. Because there was no one better than him, hence he took the duty of Khilafat. Now, with regards to the Pledge of Allegiance, again, this is some where you get more fabrications. It is the unanimous opinion of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah that the Ansar and the Muhajiruns, they pledged their support and they did the bay'ah with Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. So when Hazrat Ali was unanimously chosen to be the next Khalifa, everyone, Ansar, Muhajiruns, they pledged their allegiance to Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, including, brothers and sisters, Hazrat Talha and Hazrat Zubair. Hazrat Talha and Hazrat Zubair. Now, why am I mentioning Hazrat Talha and Zubair's name? Obviously, if you've had a look at the course book, you will see their name coming up quite a bit during the Battle of Jamal. That during the Battle of Jamal, you had Hazrat Aisha on one side, Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair on another side, and you had Hazrat Ali here. So even Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair, they also pledged allegiance to Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. The only person not to pledge allegiance at that time was Hazrat Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Hazrat Muawiyah, he did not pledge allegiance. But I'll mention later that Hazrat Muawiyah, he did not, ever dispute Ali radiallahu anhu's khilafat. He agreed that yes, Hazrat Ali is the next best person after Uthman to be the Khalifa. He didn't dispute on that point. But what Hazrat Muawiyah anhu's intention was that firstly we should bring the insurgents to justice, Pir uske baad, then I'll do the Khilafah. That was his own take on the story. That was his own ijtihad, that we should first and foremost think about bringing the killers to justice, like Hazrat Usman's killers to justice, in other words, kill them, assassinate them, do whatever. Thereafterwards, then I'll do the Khilafah. So then I'll do the bay'ah. So basically what I'm trying to explain here, brothers and sisters, is that Muawiyah anhu never ever disputed Hazrat Ali anhu's Khilafah. He never disputed that he shouldn't be the Khalifa. What he disagreed on, brothers and sisters, was that no, forget Khilafah for the time being. Let's bring the killers to justice. Then afterwards, I'll do the bay'ah. So that was Hazrat Muawiyah anhu's take of the particular situation. This takes me on to the next point here. Some claims, some objections, some i'tiraz against Ali anhu's khilafat, and the answers given with regards to those claims and objections. Now, the first objection, if we could just have a look at these slides for the time being, which people make against Ali radiallahu anhu's Khilafat, is that some of the Sahabas like Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, Muhammad bin Maslama, Ibn Umar and Usama bin Zayd did not pledge with Ali. So that's the first objection. Some say that these companions did not do the bay'ah with Ali radiallahu anhu. So they are high-ranked Sahabas, as you can see. So first and foremost, the first objection is that Ali radiallahu anhu's Khilafat is not unanimous because these Sahabas didn't do the bay'ah. Number two, another objection is that some people, they pledged allegiance to him on the condition that he takes revenge for Uthman radiallahu anhu's killers. So another objection which is brought forward is that they did the bay'ah on the condition that he takes revenge against Uthman radiallahu anhu's killers. And the third objection they had, brothers and sisters, was that the people of Sham, Syria, where Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was based, and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu himself did not take pledge of allegiance to Ali. So by using these three objections, brothers and sisters, what people are trying to imply is that Ali radiallahu anhu's Khilafat is not something unanimous. Not everybody agreed on it. Hazrat Abu Bakr's Khilafat, everybody agreed on it. Umar radiallahu anhu's Khilafat, everybody agreed on it. Uthman radiallahu anhu's Khilafat, everybody agreed on it. But regarding Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu's Khilafat, as you can see here, because of these objections, it gives the meaning that there wasn't a unanimous opinion regarding Ali radiallahu anhu's Khilafat. Many of the main Sahabas either did not do bay'ah or did a bay'ah based on a condition, and with regards to Muawiyah and the people of Sham, they even did not bother, they didn't even turn up to do a pledge of allegiance. Now let's have a look at some of the answers. First answer. So when we say answer one, that's answer one to the first objection. The first objection was these Sahabas, Sa'd bin Waqqas, Muhammad Maslama, they did not do the pledge of allegiance. Now the answer here, brothers and sisters, is that no, there was a pledge of allegiance. These companions, these Sahabas, did do a pledge of allegiance with Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But these companions who I have mentioned at the top, they did not assist him. They didn't assist him. Sa'd bin Waqqas, Muhammad bin Maslama, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. They did not assist Ali radiallahu anhu, but they did the bay'ah. So they did the pledge of allegiance, but when it came to certain battles like Battle of Jamal, Battle of Siffin, these companions, brothers and sisters, decided not to participate. Okay? That was their personal ijtihad, that was their own take of things, and we'll look at it later, what I'm just mentioning now. The reason why they didn't participate, brothers and sisters, is because there was a hadith, can be found in Kitab al-Fitan, Bukhari, that a time will come where Prophet ﷺ said, Al-fitnatu tamuju kamawjil bahr. That fitna will surge. Tamuju will surge kamawjil bahar, like the waves of the ocean. In other words, a time will come, brothers and sisters, there will be too much fitna, too much kind of like infighting between Muslims, that you won't know what the truth and what the haqq is. There'll be too much infighting. Tamuju kamawjil bahar. You won't know what the truth is, you won't know what the batil and the false is. It will become so bad, as Prophet ﷺ once prophesied, Yusbihu rajul mu'minan wa yumsi kafiran. That a believer in the morning, he will be a believer in the morning and he will be a disbeliever by night. Or wa yumsi mu'minan wa yusbihu kafiran. Or that he will be a believer at night, but in the morning he will be a disbeliever. And Prophet ﷺ said that when fitna will surge like this, tamuju kamawjil bahr, the hadith of Sayyid Bukhari explains that the one who is sitting down is better than the one who is standing. And the one who is standing is better than the one who is walking. And the one who is walking is better than the one who is running. Indicating that the more you are away from the fitna, because when you're sitting down, brothers, you're slightly away from the fitna. Let's say if the fitna was outside, if you're sitting down, you're slightly away from the fitna compared to you standing up. And if you're walking towards the fitna, that is worse than standing there. And if you're running, that is worse than walking. Indicating what Prophet ﷺ was trying to say is that during the time of fitna, stay way, way away from it. So these companions, when they looked at the situation, what was happening, they believed that the hadith which Prophet ﷺ prophesied about fitan, about mischief, about trials and tribulations, which will hit the Muslim ummah, these great companions interpreted the fitna prophesied by Prophet ﷺ to be applicable at that moment in time, at the martyrdom of Uthman al-Anhu and the state of anarchy and chaos which soon followed. That's what these Sahabas believed. That's why they said, okay, we'll do the bay'ah, but we don't want to help you. We're not going to help you in the battle of Jamal, we're not going to help you in any battle, because we believe this to be the fitna prophesied by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The second answer, as I mentioned, the second objection was that also a few people disagree, it does not affect the consensus. Now, for something to be ijma, it's not necessary that every single person has to believe it. For something to be ijma. Ijma means a consensus. Like when we say it's a consensus of scholars. It's not necessary that every single person has to believe. So when we say, for example, that Taraweeh is 20 rakats, and we say it's a consensus of these scholars, there are some scholars who say, no, it's only 8 rakats. But just because one or two scholars differ or disagree, it doesn't break the ijma. It doesn't go against the ijma. So similarly here, likewise here, just because these Sahabas disagree, like the people of Sham, as the Muawiyah disagree, it doesn't mean that it's not ijma anymore. Third answer here is the claim that they pledged allegiance to him on the condition that Ali executes the murder of Usman. This is not authentic. as a condition on the allegiance. Rather, they pledge allegiance to him on the condition of him ruling truthfully, which is that he should summon those who had a blood claim. Now, what does that mean, brothers and sisters? One of the objections which was made was that some of the Sahaba, some of the people pledged allegiance or did bay'ah with Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu based on Ali radiallahu anhu going to execute and bring Uthman radiallahu anhu's killers to justice. Now, the point which the scholars have mentioned here is, to tell the truth, no Sahabi ever made such a condition like that. No Sahabi, no companion ever made such a pledge like that, ever made such a condition like that. But rather, when they took the pledge of allegiance, it was based on that the Amir would judge truthfully, that he will do insaf and justice. And that involved bringing the killers of Uthman radiallahu anhu to justice. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that none of the Sahaba said, okay, I'll do bay'ah, but you have to bring Uthman radiallahu anhu's killers to justice. There's no such pledge like that. You can't make such a pledge. But basically, what it was based on, it was based that they did the bay'ah, the pledge of allegiance. They did that, but it was based on that the Amir al-Mu'mineen, Hazrat Ali, would judge with justice. And obviously, judging with justice meant that he will have to bring Uthman radiallahu anhu's killers to justice. And as I mentioned with regards to Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, him disagreeing with Ali radiallahu anhu was not on the actual khilafat itself. He was just disagreeing that, look, I just want the killers brought to justice first, thereafterwards then I'll do the bay'ah with you. Now the next part of the course, if brothers and sisters could look in the course book, I didn't make any slides for this one. It's basically more or less from page 16 onwards, where we're going to be looking at 3 very important battles. It started off with the Battle of Jamal. Then he went to the Battle of Siffin, and then he ended with the Battle of Nahrawan. Now, before we look at those 3 battles, I'm just going to mention 1 or 2 points about the governors during Ali radiallahu anhu's time. So one thing about Ali radiallahu anhu was that he liked consistency. He liked something which was happening. He liked that to be continued. And this is actually one mashwara which I will give brothers and sisters, that sometimes if there is something which is going well, there's no need for you to change it. If a particular system is working, so it could be in a madrasa, school, mosque, whatever, a system is going nice, going smooth, there's no need for you to kind of like exercise your power and show, no, I'm just going to change it because I've got authority. That is being foolish, that is being stupid. And that's one thing about Ali radiallahu anhu, all the Khalifas actually, that Ali radiallahu anhu, he continued with the governors which Uthman radiallahu anhu had. In his humble opinion, he thought that the governors of Uthman were doing a good job. So he just kept them in their posts. The same with regards to Uthman, that when he became a Khalifa, he kept most of the governors of Umar radiallahu anhu in their position because, according to Uthman radiallahu anhu, they were doing a good job. So that is the point to mention here. Obviously, don't get the wrong idea that it didn't mean that he just kept the governors just for the sake of it. If they were weak, if they were unjust, then obviously he removed them. And he goes on to explain about Hazrat Usman and Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. They kind of appointed relatives for certain governmental duties. Hazrat Ali and Hazrat Usman appointed their relatives as governors and ministers of certain parts. And there's some examples there where regarding how many governors did Uthman radiallahu anhu have and how many did Ali radiallahu anhu have. But the point I want to make here, brothers and sisters, is that Hazrat Usman and Hazrat Ali, they didn't choose their relatives as governors just based on them being relatives. No, they had to be fit for that duty. So if they were capable, worthy of that duty, he made them governors. And this is, brothers and sisters, stark contrast to Umar radiallahu anhu, because Umar radiallahu anhu, he didn't want any of his family members to be governors. He didn't want any of them to be governors because he didn't want his family to go through the difficulty of running, supervising a government. He didn't want that to happen. So he didn't choose any of his family members to be governors and ministers. But regarding Hazrat Uthman, Hazrat Ali, then what happened, brothers and sisters, is that they nominated certain of their relatives to be ministers and governors of certain posts. Another point which I liked about Ali radiallahu anhu's governance and the way he governed the people was this last point here, is that he always supervised his governors and ministers. And I mentioned this point many, many times before, that to make your employees work harder is sometimes they should know that they are being checked. Sometimes they should know that they are being supervised. Because if they knew that there was no supervision, if they knew that, oh, I could just turn up work whenever I want, go whenever I want, then what's going to happen is that job is going to be all over the place. That part of your company, that department of your company will be all over. You know, the workers will be coming in at 10 o'clock, it's a 9 to 5 shift, but they'll come in at 10, 11, and probably go at 4, and they'll still get the full day's pay. So what's going to happen is they're hardly going to do any work, and they're going to actually cause more problems. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he made sure of two things which I like. One was supervising, making sure that employees, workers, governors, everyone do their jobs properly. Number two, and this is what I liked in particular, is that he would create an environment, or he created an environment where he made sure that the governors who he had hired, their effort is not going to waste. One of the reasons for demotivation in a job is workers or employees working, but then they see that my effort is not going anywhere. My effort's going to waste. And we see this a lot, especially in mosques and madrasas, where sometimes teachers are teaching, but when they see the students not learning much, or no kind of like plans being put there for students to learn, but teachers are learning, but students are not understanding, teachers then get demotivated. So they'll come, they'll teach, but they won't really try hard because they think, oh, students are not learning, why should I bother? It's like, say, for example, in an audience of people, if the lecturer looks at the audience and he sees that the audience are not listening, the lecturer is not going to really try hard. Is he just going to like do what he needs to, just like say whatever he will say, even correct information, wrong information, he'll just say anything, and then he'll go and say, well, I've done my job. But if there's eagerness from the audience, they are willing, they're listening, then naturally the lecturer will say, I want to put more effort in. It's natural. So exactly here, Ali would realize this, that I need to create an environment where teachers' effort, governors' effort, employees' effort are not going to waste. And he did that, and he also made sure that governors are being checked and supervised so that they don't do anything against Ali anhu's intention or his desires or his chahat. They wanted everything to be done according to the Quran and the Sunnah. Now moving on to the next point here. So as I was saying, we're now going to be looking at some very important battles which happened during Ali anhu's time and Khilafat. Now let's have a look at the first battle, brothers and sisters, the Battle of Jamal. Now this is continuing from page 18 onwards, so you could have a look at it during your own time. I'll just explain very briefly the Battle of Jamal and what exactly happened. Now, first and foremost, before we delve into the battle, we should understand that what I'm going to explain, we should not think low of the companions. We should not think these companions are supposed to be great personalities. How come they fought with each other? So we shouldn't think low of them. I won't say that was the case for the Battle of Jamal, but probably for the Battle of Siffin, that would be more of the case. The Battle of Jamal was more started by the insurgents, Abdullah bin Sabah types of people. So first and foremost, brothers, we shouldn't think low of the companions, because it is one of the beliefs of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah that we love and we respect every single Sahabi, every single companion. And we as Muslims believe that all the companions of Prophet ﷺ will go to Jannah, will go to paradise. So we should never think low of them. We should never think bad of them. We should never think that, why did they start fighting with each other? Never think like that. That's one point. Number two, another point I want to mention here is that what happened in these battles was based on a personal ijtihad, which means was based on each and every single companion's personal personal understanding of the issue. So what I mean by that, say for example I mentioned like Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when this issue came of the Battle of Jamal, he said, no, I don't want to get involved. Other companions took Aisha radiallahu anha's side. Other companions took Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu's side. Some were neutral, some didn't want to get involved. So the ones who took Aisha radiallahu anha's side, the ones who took Ali radiallahu anhu's side, it was all based on their respective understanding of the situation. They thought Ali radiallahu anhu to be on the haqq. Others thought Aisha radiallahu anha to be on the haqq. The two things you should understand that this was more like Sahabas, what they firmly believed in. And number two, we should never disregard or say anything derogatory against the companions when we're looking at this particular issue. Now, to tell the truth, I could have taken the easy route out and I could have said, look, it's best that we don't talk about it, and I could have just wrapped up the course and that's it. But the problem is that there are many information about the Battle of Jamal, the Battle of Siffin, and Ali radiallahu anhu, which you will find on the internet, which is totally untrue, totally incorrect, all fabrication. So that's why brothers and sisters need to know what is the Ahl Sunnah, what Jama'ah point of view, perspective of these issues. But what could happen is that if it's not communicated by the imams or the scholars, then youngsters, brothers, sisters will look on the internet and they'll get the wrong information. Now let's begin with the first battle, the Battle of Jamal. Now Jamal means camel. So it's also known as the Battle of the Camels. And why is it called the Battle of the Camels? Because Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha was traveling on a camel which went to Basra, which is in Iraq. So because of that reason, the name Battle of Camel, Battle of Jamal came about. Now, how did it all start? Now, what happened, brothers and sisters, was when Uthman radiallahu anhu was martyred. I mentioned that he was martyred during the month of Zulhijjah in Medina Munawwara. Most of the companions were not in Medina, they had gone to Makkah. So it was pre-planned by the rebels that, look, let's kill him in Zulhijjah. Uthman radiallahu anhu. Why? Because look, many of the major companions have gone for Hajj. Medina is going to be slightly empty. We'll go and we'll finish off Uthman radiallahu anhu. Now Aisha radiallahu anha, who was in, obviously her residence was Medina. After she performed a Hajj and she was traveling back to Medina, she heard of Uthman radiallahu anhu's martyrdom. She went back to Makkah and she said, and remember the insurgents were brewing for a while, for a good few years it was brewing. So it wasn't like all of a sudden the insurgents killed Uthman radiallahu anhu. As I said, last 6 years of Uthman radiallahu anhu's khilaf, there was problems. People were seeing the insurgents taking over and having more of a say in various places like Iraq, in Kufa and Basra. So Aisha went back to Makkah. She then stood up and gave a speech. And in this speech, brothers and sisters, Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha explained that we should seek revenge for the killers of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. We should look for those rebels and insurgents and kill them. We should basically go and kill them. So that, subhanAllah, brought about what we call a lot of support. That brought about a lot of support for Sayyidah Aisha Danha. So what happened was, Aisha anha and the companions, and from amongst the companions there were Hazrat Talha and Hazrat Zubair, who I spoke about before. They accompanied Hazrat Aisha anha, and they decided to go to Basra. Now Basra is a place in Iraq. Why did they choose Basra? Because there were low-level insurgents in Basra. It wasn't like in Egypt where there were quite a number of insurgents. There were insurgents in Basra, but they were more like a low level. So Aisha Danha thought that it will be better that we target Basra first. We basically wipe the insurgents away from Basra, and then we move up to the next group on the next city where the insurgents are. So that was Sayyidah Aisha Danha's take on everything. She marched towards Basra. Now if we have a look at page 20, there's a paragraph there, the Day of Tears. When Sayyidah Aisha and also Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair, when they were leaving Makkah, many of the people were weeping. They were crying. Because this was the very first time Muslims were going out intentionally to wipe away Muslims. Now the other insurgents, remember, you would call them more like hypocrites and munafiqs, but to the people outside, they're Muslims. Because during Uthman anhu's time, even though there were a lot of hypocrites and insurgents, as I mentioned in the previous course, Uthman anhu never did he send a battalion or an army to go and wipe away the insurgents or the rebels. Well, this was the very first time that a group of Sahabas, a group of people, were leaving with the intention to wipe away fellow Muslims. Even though their iman was questionable, but to the people outside, they seemed to be Muslims, so they were going to wipe them away. So people were crying. And if you look in the course book, page 20, the Day of Tears, Sayyidah Hafsa anha, who was also Rasulullah's wife, so he goes on to explain that she accompanied Aisha anha to the outskirts of Makkah. But then she went back to Makkah because her brother Abdullah bin Umar did not allow Hazrat Hafsa to go with Aisha to Basra. Now he goes on to explain that when Sayyidah Aisha anha and Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair, they went to Basra, Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he heard that the mother of the believers, Sayyidah Aisha, and some of the companions were going to Basra to wipe away or to fight against the rebels. Now, Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu didn't disagree with them in principle. He agreed with them. But what Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu was of the opinion of is let the situation calm down, then we will wage war against the rebels. Then we will wage war against the rebels. In other words, what I'm trying to explain here, brothers and sisters, and this is where there was the difference of opinion. Aisha radiallahu anha, Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair, they wanted to basically bring the killers of Uthman radiallahu anhu to justice straight away. Ali radiallahu anhu also wanted to do the same as well. But Ali radiallahu anhu was saying, look, let's let everything settle down. Let's build the unity and ittihad. Thereafterwards we will, kill and bring Uthman radiallahu anhu's killers to justice. So it wasn't like Hazrat Ali was disagreeing. No, he was agreeing, but he was saying, come on, let's take our time. Well, let's think about it. Torah aista let's let everything settle down. Whereas the other Sahabas wanted to do it straight away. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he disagreed with the stance Aisha radiallahu anha, Hazrat Zubair, Hazrat Talha were taking that day without the Amir al-Mu'mineen's consent, went out of their own will to go and take on the rebels. Look, you have the Amir at the top. But then if someone disregards the command of the Amir and does his own things, it's not really good for unity and ittihad. It's not really good for unity and ittihad. So basically, what Ali radiallahu anhu thought was that what Hazrat Aisha, what Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair are doing without a direct explicit command from the Amir going to Basra and taking on the rebels, that's not actually good. It should be done together. So what happened was that Ali radiallahu anhu, if you look at page 22, he sent Qa'qa, one of his messengers, Qa'qa, to Aisha, to Talha and to Zubair for peace negotiations. He said, come on, let's do it together. It doesn't seem good that two Muslim groups for the same goal. It's like sometimes we say the same as well, that mosques should work together. Because our main aim is conveying the message of Allah and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So rather than two mosques doing the same thing, but separately, it'll be far more better that they get together and then they do it. So similarly here, that it will be far more better that Hazrat Ali, Hazrat Aisha, Hazrat Talha, when they bring their forces together and then they bring Uthman radiallahu anhu's killers to justice rather than both of them doing it separately. So what happened was that Qa'qa was sent to Aisha, Talha, Zubair radiallahu anhu for negotiations of peace, that come on, let's do it together, let's not, you go back to Makkah, go back to where you are, let's settle down and then we'll take on the insurgents. So alhamdulillah, everybody agreed that there would be a peace treaty, everybody agreed, the night passed, it was obviously decided in the morning that there would be a peace treaty. Both parties were happy. As Ali was happy, that alhamdulillah we're not going to be fighting anyone, and Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair, Hazrat Aisha were also happy as well. Now the bottom of page 22 explains how exactly did the Battle of Jamal start. Now what happened, brothers and sisters, was that by night there was a treaty agreed in principle that everyone will go their separate ways tomorrow, no one will be fighting anyone. Now Abdullah bin Sabah and his people, such as UKIM ibn Jabala, they thought to themselves that, you know what, this is a great opportunity to cause further differences within the Muslims. Muslims are already dysfunctional, they are disunited after the martyrdom of Uthman. Let's make them even more disunited. So what Abdullah bin Sabah and his comrades decided is that at night time, hum ye karenge is that one cavalry will do a surprise attack on Aisha radiallahu anha and Hazrat Talha and Zubair radiallahu anhuma's forces, and another cavalry will do a surprise attack on Ali radiallahu anhu's forces. Surprise attacks at night time when everyone sleep, we'll just like throw one or two arrows at them. And what we will then do is that we'll blame the other party. So when Ali radiallahu anhu's forces say, well, who threw the arrows, we will blame Hazrat Aisha. And when Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha's party and troops say, well, who threw arrows and spears at us, we'll blame Hazrat Ali. And that's what they did. They were thinking like, well, how was it possible? Even in Hazrat Ali's group, there were some rebels and munafiq types of people there. Yeah, so there were those people who just started a fight. And the same also in Sayyidah Aisha anha's group. Okay, and this is something which we should always be wary of. Munafiqs with living within, moles living within. That was there during Prophet ﷺ's time. Look, if it was there during Prophet ﷺ's time, where munafiqs were within Prophet ﷺ during the Khayrul Qurun era, then I'll say the likelihood now, which is the worst of all eras, there must be many, many more munafiqs around. If during Rasulullah ﷺ's time there were munafiqs, even though the hadith explains Khayrul Quruni Qarni, the best era is my era, but there were still munafiqs there. So now you're telling me like in this era, which is the Khayrul Fasad Dhul Qarni, the worst of eras, wouldn't there be any munafiqs? I'm sure there'll be plenty of munafiqs and moles and hypocrites around. So they were there during Ali radiallahu anhu's time, in his troops, in his forces, and also in Sayyidah Aisha anha's time, in her troops. And they started the fight. And what then happened is that the fighting then escalated. In other words, they thought that, oh, it's Ali radiallahu anhu's people, throwing the spears and the arrows. They then started retaliating, obviously with the intention of self-defense. And vice versa, everybody then started attacking each other. So this is what happened, brothers and sisters. Now it goes on to explain later on in the course book that what happened was Hazrat Talha radiallahu anhu, he got wounded in this battle, and he then passed away. And with regards to Hazrat Zubair radiallahu anhu, so Hazrat Talha got wounded in this battle, he passed away. And regarding Hazrat Zubair radiallahu anhu, he then realized when the Muslims were fighting each other that the hadiths which Prophet ﷺ prophesied, and I mentioned these hadiths about fitan, al-fitna tamuju kamawjil bahr. He then realized that the hadiths regarding fitna is being applied or is basically applicable to our situation. So what Hazrat Zubair who did, brothers and sisters, was that he just left the battlefield. He put his arms down and he just walked away. But one of the insurgents seen Hazrat Zubair walking away. And because Zubair was one of the main Sahabas living at that time, one of the insurgents chased Hazrat Zubair and martyred him. So that's what happened. So that's how the Battle of Jamal started. The intention obviously was to wipe away the insurgents and to basically kill them. But there was a peace treaty there, a negotiation of peace. But then what happened, brothers and sisters, was that the rebels got involved. They instigated a fight which basically caused two Muslim armies to start fighting with each other, which caused the loss of many people. Remember, Sayyidah Aisha anha's intention wasn't to fight any Muslims. Even Ali anhu's intention wasn't to fight Sayyidah Aisha anha, but rather there was always respect between the two. But because the insurgents started something off, that's why it led to problems which led to the death of many of the Sahabas. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, we have reached the fifth and final session before we conclude and finish the course of Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. There are two more battles to mention. Thereafterwards we'll look at how Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was martyred, and we will then finish off by looking at the number of women and the number of children. So the number of women Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu anhu married during his lifetime, and the number of children Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu had. Now, in the earlier session, we were looking at the Battle of Jamal. That then leads us on to the next battle, the Battle of Siffin. Now this battle took place between Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu and Hazrat Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Unlike the Battle of Jamal, it was based on a personal ijtihad, a personal difference of opinion between Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu and Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, what was the difference of opinion? The people of Sham and Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu wanted instant retribution of the killers of Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And they said that unless Uthman radiyallahu anhu's killers are brought to justice, we are not going to take the bay'ah. And I mentioned in the earlier session that never did Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu disagree with Ali radiyallahu anhu about khilafat, about his khilafat. He never disagreed. He always agreed on his khilafat. But what they disagreed about was with regards to Muawiyah wanting the killers of Uthman to be brought to justice first. Thereafterwards, bay'ah. So that's where there was the difference of opinion. Very famous companion, Murrah bin Ka'b, he stood up and he gave a sermon to the people of Syria. And he reminded the people of Syria of a hadith which I mentioned before regarding the virtues of Uthman. That once Uthman anhu was wearing a hood and he passed by a group of companions. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said that this person will be killed mazluman, i.e. oppressed on that day. And they found out that the person who was in the hood was Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So the people started mentioning these hadiths, trying to justify that, look, Uthman radiallahu anhu, he's a mazloom. He wasn't the zalim here, he wasn't the oppressor here, he was the victim. So therefore, retribution for his killers is paramount. It's necessary before we move on with anything else in life. We need to bring Uthman anhu's killers to justice. So you can imagine that everyone was, in particular the people of Syria, were in a frenzy. Proper Josh, that yes, we need to bring the killers of Uthman anhu to justice. As I mentioned before, Ali anhu didn't disagree with that. He said yes, but what he wanted was that let's calm the situation down and then we'll bring the killers of Uthman anhu to justice. Now what happened was the two armies, they got together. Sayyidina Ali anhu, he sent one of the companions, Jarir bin Abdullah, to basically try to do a peace treaty between Ali anhu and Muawiyah anhu. But that did not work, that did not happen. So then afterwards, they reached a place called Siffin, which is near River Euphrates, which is in Iraq, and a battle ensued between the two parties. And if you look in the course book, now on page 36, it tells us the results that from Muawiyah anhu's army, approximately there were 45,000 casualties, and Ali radiallahu anhu's army, they were 25,000 casualties. So there was proper intense fighting for 3 days. Yeah, for 3 days there was like a lot of big intense fighting. Thereafterwards, Muawiyah anhu, he sent a messenger, Amr bin As, to go to Ali anhu with a copy of the Holy Quran. And in those days, holding up the Holy Quran meant, let's stop the battle and let's have a peace treaty. It's like saying boxing, when the corner throwing the towel. When they throw the towel in the ring, it means, bus, we've given up, we surrender. So here in those days, standing up with the Quran in your hand, or approaching the other party with the Quran in your hand, meant, let's end the war and let's do a truce. So what happened was that Amr bin As anhu, he went to Ali anhu holding the Holy Quran, and that ended the war, i.e. the Battle of Siffin, and it led to a peace treaty and a truce between Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Hazrat Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And what then happened, brothers and sisters, was that it led to the division of powers in the Islamic government. So in other words, Muawiyah then became the leader of Syria, of Sham. And the rest of the Islamic government was now under the leadership of Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So the battle of Siffin led to what we call tahqib, a separation, a division within the Muslim Ummah. You had Hazrat Muawiyah now looking after or running the affairs of the people of Syria, and then you had Hazrat Ali anhu running the affairs of the rest of the Islamic world, which was like the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, Persia, Rome. They were now under control of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So that happened because of the battle of Siffin, and then obviously the peace treaty which later ensued, that there was now a division between the two parties. Now moving along to the next main battle here. This was basically revenge for everything. This battle is like one of those battles known as revenge battles. The Battle of Naharawan. Now you may be thinking that what did Ali anhu do regarding these insurgents? Because two battles have already happened with Ali anhu. The first one was the Battle of Jamal, even though it wasn't started by Muslims, started by rebels. And then there was the Battle of Siffin. And the cause for the two battles were that the insurgents were slowly taking control of certain parts of the Islamic State, and that they were not being brought to justice for killing Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So some of you brothers may be thinking that what then Ali anhu did about all of these things? What exactly did he do? Now what Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu did was, because people were accusing Ali anhu of not doing enough against the rebels. So that came to an end when he decided to fight the rebels, the Khawarij, the insurgents, and this is known as the Battle of Naharawan. And in this battle, as you can see, that when Ali anhu reached Naharawan, he planted a ra'ya, a flag, a standard on the ground, and he said that anybody who comes under this flag will receive amnesty, will receive aman. But then afterwards, those who didn't, what Ali anhu decided was that we will wage war against them. And it's mentioned that the rebels, there were 4,000 of them. In another narration it says there were at least 40,000 of them. They were emphatically killed, most of them by Ali anhu during this battle of Naharawan. So all those years, Abdullah bin Sabah, whose name I mentioned before, who was drumming up support, who was drumming up people to kind of, cause problems within the Muslim Ummah, it all came to an end. All these insurgents from Egypt, from Basra, Kufa, whatever they were, they all gathered at Naharawan, and Ali radiallahu anhu basically dismantled and destroyed more or less every single one of them. Obviously, few managed to escape, but most of them, the overwhelming majority, were killed and were destroyed during the Battle of Nahrawan. Now, when Ali radiallahu anhu wiped away the people, the Khawarij, the insurgents in Nahrawan, the problems of the insurgents had more or less been wiped away from the Islamic Ummah, but there were still one or two remaining. Which then takes me on to the next point. This is on page 38, everyone. And that is regarding Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu's martyrdom. So look, Nahrawan people were the insurgents, many of them in Nahrawan were killed. But there were still a few remaining. So what happened, let's have a read on page 38, where he talks about the martyrdom of Ali radiallahu anhu. Now, the Khawarij, the few who were remaining, they gathered in Makkah, near the Kaaba. Now you may be thinking, well, these rebels and insurgents, how on earth could they gather inside the Baytullah? So remember, brothers, these beliefs, these aqidas, it's got to do beliefs and aqidas of the heart. So people didn't know that these people still had these beliefs. So what happened? They gathered around the Kaaba, and there were 3 of them remaining. There was very few remaining, but 3 of them were still there. And what happened was that they talked about their forefathers, the insurgents. They talked about their forefathers, that our forefathers did this, they managed to topple Uthman ibn anhu, we managed to cause friction between Hazrat Ali, Hazrat Muawiyah, we caused a separation. They were talking about their forefathers in a very proud way, like, Alhamdulillah, like, killed Uthman ibn anhu, and Nauzubillah, they caused friction. They were talking about it in a way that they did something amazing and great. But then the conversation went to anger. Anger directed at Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. That Ali radiallahu anhu, he wiped away many of our forefathers. The anger went towards Hazrat Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, because Hazrat Muawiyah also was planning to defeat and kill the insurgents, because he held the insurgents responsible for Uthman ibn anhu's death. So the anger went to Muawiyah ibn anhu, and also to Amr bin As, who was Muawiyah ibn anhu's trusted lieutenant and aide and wazir and minister. So the Khawarij, you could imagine that they were firstly talking about their forefathers in a good way, then they were talking about their loss, and then their conversation turned into anger that these 3 people we blame for the loss of our forefathers. So what they decided to do is that we're going to assassinate every single one of them. We're going to kill Ali radiallahu anhu, we're going to kill Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and also Amr bin As radiallahu anhu. Them 3 we are going to kill. So if we have a look at the second paragraph here, he explains that they chose Abdurrahman bin Muljim to assassinate Ali, Barak bin Abdullah to assassinate Muawiyah, and Amr bin Bakr was assigned to kill Amr bin As. So this is what they decided. The Abdurrahman bin Muljim will kill and assassinate Hazrat Ali. Barq bin Abdullah will kill Muawiyah, and Amr bin As will be killed by Amr bin Bakr. That's what they decided. And it's mentioned that these three young men, they whitened their swords with poison. And during the month of Ramadan, they went to their intended targets to assassinate them. So that's what they decided. They poisoned their sword, and then they went to the various parts of the Islamic dynasty where Ali was in Kufa, Muawiyah, and Amr bin As, they were in the Syria region. So the three young men, after poisoning their sword, went to these three respective places. Now let's begin with Muawiyah al-Anhu. Now it's mentioned that Barq bin Abdullah, it's on the handbook, Barq bin Abdullah attacked Muawiyah at Damascus whilst he was leading the Fajr prayer. The murderer was caught red-handed. His feet and tongue were cut off in the first instance. He was ultimately put to death. The wound that Muawiyah received was not fatal, and after a few days he became cured. So the first attempt was Barq bin Abdullah attacking Muawiyah al-Anhu. So as you can see, that he attacked Muawiyah whilst Muawiyah al-Anhu was praying, was leading the Fajr prayer in Masjid al-Dimashq, i.e. in the Mosque of Damascus. But Muawiyah al-Anhu's wound wasn't that serious. He managed to become better, but because Barq bin Abdullah, he was an insurgent, and he made the attempt to assassinate Hazrat Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was then put to death. The next person, Amr bin As. Now, as I mentioned, that Amr bin Bakr was tasked with the duty to assassinate Amr bin As. So what happened? Amr bin Bakr, he went to Fustat where Amr bin As was to assassinate Amr bin As. But as you can see here, that day, because of illness, he did not attend the Fajr prayers in the mosque. So Amr bin As did not go for Fajr that day. Instead, the prayers were led by his deputy Kharija bin Huzaifa. And the assassin, having not seen Amr bin As before, assumed Kharija to be Amr bin As, and he killed him, assassinated him instead, and not Amr bin As radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So now when the person, i.e. Amr bin Bakr, when he was caught, he was also put to death. Why? Because he killed Kharija. As mentioned in the Quran, an-nafsu bin-nafs. وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّ النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ. That soul in exchange for the soul. So that was the situation regarding Muawiyah. He was injured, but it wasn't fatal. His wound, he survived. And with regards to Amr bin As, somebody else was killed. So Amr bin As who managed to survive. The third person, the assassination of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now Abdurrahman bin Muljim, who was designated to kill Ali anhu, he arrived in Kufa. And when he arrived in Kufa, he met this woman whose name was Qutb. And she was a very attractive, beautiful woman. And he fell in love with her. And he wanted to marry her. Now, Qutb was also a rebel, was also a Khawarij. So she said to Abdurrahman bin Muljim that, yes, I'll marry you, but the dowry is you need to present to me the head of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. In other words, if you kill Ali radiallahu anhu, then that's it, that's your mahar and your dowry done. You could then marry him. So Abdurrahman bin Muljim was thinking, I've come to Kufa anyway to kill Ali radiallahu anhu. So I'm marrying this woman Qutb as well. So I'm doing 2 for 1. One thing, and I'm getting 2 rewards. 2 for the price of 1. So I'm getting married, and also I'm killing Ali radiallahu anhu. And that's the killing of Ali is going to be the mahar and the dowry. So you can imagine Abdurrahman bin Muljim must have been on cloud 9. So he must be really happy that I'm getting married and I'm killing, and then I don't even have to give anything extra for the dowry. The killing, the assassination of Ali is the dowry and the mahar. So what happened? The story then continues that 2 more people helped and assisted Abdurrahman bin Muljim to kill Ali. They were Wildan, and the other one was Shubayb bin Bijra. So one was Wildan, and the second one was Shubayb bin Bijra. 2 Khawarij people. So they assisted Abdurrahman. They were going to assist Abdurrahman in killing Ali radiallahu anhu. Now the next paragraph, brothers and sisters, goes on to explain that it was the 17th of Ramadan. It was a Friday prayer. So look what day they chose to kill and assassinate Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. Friday, and it was middle of the month of Ramadan. So the assassinators, they hid inside the mosque of Kufa, known as the Great Mosque of Kufa. It still exists nowadays as well. There's pictures on the internet. So Ali radiallahu anhu, so these 3 assassinators, Wildan, Shubayb and Abdurrahman, they hid inside the Great Mosque of Kufa. And Ali radiallahu anhu, because he used to lead the Fajr prayer, he opened the door of the mosque and he was the first one inside the mosque. Obviously being the Imam, naturally you'll be the first one inside the mosque, open up for everybody else. Now when he went in, when Ali radiallahu anhu went, it came into the mosque and he was approaching, or he was making his way towards the minbar where he was going to stand and lead the prayer. The 3 of them came from behind the minbar and they attacked Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And if we have a look at the paragraph in front of us, that Wildan struck at Ali but missed his mark. That Wildan came from behind the minbar first, and he tried to attack Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, but he missed him. So then Abdurrahman bin Muljim struck Ali radiallahu anhu on the forehead with his poisoned sword, which penetrated onto the brain through the scar of an old wound. Thereafterwards, the assassins fled from the mosque. So Abdurrahman bin Muljim, he then came and with his sword, and remember his sword was whitened with poison, came and struck Ali radiallahu anhu across the head. Now Ali radiallahu anhu had an old scar from before, so the sword of Abdurrahman bin Muljim hit the old scar. And because the sword was mixed with poison, the poison then inserted into Ali radiallahu anhu's own wound, penetrating right into his brain. Now when people, remember Ali radiallahu anhu was the first one there, so no one witnessed what happened. So when people came, they found the Amir al-Mu'mineen Hazrat Ali bin Abi Talib anhu lying in a pool of blood. So they realized, they saw what happened. They then went and chased the culprits, the assassins. He's going to explain that Wildan, he was caught and killed. And Abdurrahman bin Muljim was taken to custody. Now Ali radiallahu anhu, he said about Abdurrahman bin Muljim, and this is what we call the Sahabas, the Khulafai Rashidin, following on the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, following on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam practice that when the conquest of Makkah happened, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he wanted, he could have taken revenge against every single mushrik of Makkah, but he decided to forgive every single one of them. So Ali radiallahu anhu, he said that if I recover from my wound, I will decide myself what to do with Abdurrahman bin Muljim, what punishment to give him. But if I die, then kill Abdurrahman bin Muljim, not because of a personal grudge, no, because Allah says in the Quran, an-nafsu bin nafs, a soul for a soul, a life for a life. So if I die because of this wound, then you kill Abdurrahman bin Muljim. And it's mentioned there that he should be killed with one stroke. In other words, executed. In other words, one swing of the sword, behead him, and that he should not be mutilated, nor made to suffer a languishing death. In other words, don't mutilate him. Don't like you hear cases in the past that they would torture them and then kill them. They would put them on those rolling stones and make their bodies stretch. Don't torture them in that way, but just execute him by beheading him once. That's it, finish him off. Don't give him a torturous, lengthy, a languishing death. Don't mutilate his body. Now the wound which Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu suffered was fatal. And he goes on to explain that on the 21st of Ramadan, 4 days after being attacked by Abdurrahman bin Muljim, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu left this world in the blessed month, the month of Ramadan, the month where virtues and barakah is immense from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the month when the shayateens and the devils are locked up, the month when the doors of Jannah are open, the month, as I mentioned before, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that whosoever finds the month of Ramadan and he lets it pass without any forgiveness being attained, he is a wretched person. And on the contrary, we could see how wretched this Abdurrahman bin Muljim must be. That during one of the blessed days, months of the year, the month of Ramadan, he kills a great and a unique personality of Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu's ilk and caliber. You can imagine how wretched Abdul Rahman bin Muljim must be. And it's mentioned, brothers and sisters, that during blessed months, blessed times, to do a sin, it's far worse. Committing sin's bad, but to do it during blessed time, it's even more bad, even more worse. So imagine how badbakhat, how wretched Abdul Rahman bin Muljim must have been. So he was obviously executed for killing Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The next point, brothers and sisters, in the course book just goes on to explain regarding his burial, where Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu was buried. Now Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu, there's actually quite a few opinions. Some opinions say that he was buried in Medina Munawwara, that his body was taken from Kufa and then it was transferred to Medina Munawwara and is buried in Jannatul Baqi. That's one opinion. Some other opinions, like we have mentioned here, is that he was buried in Kufa, not far from the Jum'ah Mosque, which is basically the great mosque of Kufa, which I was referring to. He was buried near there. Some say that he was buried in Najaf. Najaf is a place in Iraq. He was buried there. That's what some ulamas have said. Now, however, some other ulamas of the opinion, like Ibn Taymiyyah, that the shrine of Ali in Najaf is not the burial place of Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. In other words, I'm sure you know this, that there's a place in Iraq called Najaf. And the Shias consider this place to be the most, well, to them, one of the holiest places. Like we have Hajj, people go, or Shias actually go there for their Hajj. And they have a kind of like an annual pilgrimage there. And they go there and they do whatever things they do when somebody passes away. So now, the Shias do this, but according to some scholars, like I mentioned, Ibn Taymiyyah and so on, of the opinion that that shrine of Ali in Najaf isn't actually the grave of Ali radiallahu anhu, but actually another well-known companion in the name of Mughira bin Shu'bah, he is buried in Najaf, not Ali. So that is the opinion of some scholars. Obviously only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, because with regards to what the Shias believe about, because obviously what the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, most of us say, is that none of the early Salaf ever mentioned Najaf to be the grave place or the shrine where it is the grave of Ali radiallahu anhu. What the Shias counteract, they say that no, Ali radiallahu anhu was secretly buried there in Najaf, so no one knew about it. And then they say later on, this is what the Shias say, that later on their sixth Imam, I said they have 12 Imams, so Unka Chatta Imam, whose name was Ja'far Sadiq, he had Kashf. Kashf means that he had illumination from God that this is the grave of Ali. So from Ja'far Sadiq's time, that's when they started accepting the grave in Najaf to be the shrine of Ali radiallahu anhu, the graveyard of Ali radiallahu anhu, and from there that's when all the decorations of Imam Ali anhu's shrine started. Obviously, there's pictures you see on the internet. That's where it started from. So that's what they believe. Continuing the next part of the course, just straightforward, just explains about wives and children of Ali anhu. As all the brothers and sisters know, that the first wife of Ali anhu was Hazrat Fatima. And during Hazrat Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha's time, Sayyidina Ali anhu did not marry anybody else. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the course book that there was a moment where Sayyidina Ali anhu had the idea of wanting to marry one of Abu Jahl's daughters. So Prophet ﷺ said that that will never happen. In other words, if you want to marry Abu Jahl's daughter and have his daughter as a second wife, then you have to divorce Fatima, my first wife. Sorry, my daughter, you have to divorce Fatima, the first wife. Because I know that if you were to marry Abu Jahl's daughter and have her as the second wife, it will hurt Fatima. And I, being the father of Hazrat Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, cannot bear to endure the pain which Fatima will go through. So this is the ultimatum Rasulullah gave to Hazrat Ali. Hazrat Ali then discarded the idea of marrying Abu Jahl's daughter. But after Hazrat Fatima radiallahu anha passed away, he then married some other women, and obviously a list of them is there in front of you in the course book. So if we look at the last part, he explains that Ali anhu married 9 wives in total. But obviously at any one time it did not exceed 4. He had a few slave girls, and he goes on to explain that he had in total 12 daughters. His slave girls bore 12 daughters. So in total, he, Sayyidina Ali anhu, was the father of 15 sons and 18 daughters. The next page or so just explains certain verses in the Holy Quran, which I mentioned before as well on the slide, which talks about Ali anhu, and then the course book then finishes off by mentioning some things of Ali anhu's learning and his generosity, in particular the gate of knowledge. The hadith, which is also on the course book as well, that Rasulullah is saying that I am the city of knowledge and Ali anhu is its gate, indicating that Ali anhu, he's like a part of knowledge. In other words, Rasulullah is the city. In other words, he has complete knowledge. But then being a gate, indicating that a substantial part of my ilm and my knowledge has also been given to Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So alhamdulillah, that concludes the course. Obviously we'd like to finish off, obviously this was the last of the series. So alhamdulillah, we'd like to thank all the brothers and sisters for attending. MashaAllah, we started in, I think it was late December, we started the first course on Abu Bakr anhu. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of today's dars, that I hope everybody learns something from it. So the idea isn't that, that we go around and we just say, oh, we did this course. The idea is that what we learned from these inspirational figures, what we learned from these individuals, these types of people, how we can implement in our own lives. So we'd like to thank all the brothers and sisters for attending the course. Also, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank the brother Sajjad, the other brothers as well, mashallah, who did a lot in terms of organizing the event. Obviously, just because I'm not mentioning a name doesn't mean that you are not appreciated. Because remember, you're not doing it for me, you're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if I mention a name or don't mention a name, it doesn't matter, you're doing it for Allah. So you will know that your reward will be given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all the efforts. As I mentioned before, it's all teamwork. I may be delivering the talk or the lesson, but obviously we need the brothers, we need responsible brothers for the food, we need brothers to set up the video, we need brothers to set up the projector, we need brothers to set up the desks and the chairs. So everybody, alhamdulillah, who helped in the various ways, whether it was lifting a chair, whether it was setting out the tables, alhamdulillah, that is your sadaqah jariyah for this cause. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may He accept all our efforts, accept our efforts in attending the course, in delivering the course. Any shortcomings from myself or any of the brothers, then may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us all. May Allah give us tawfiq. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ وَآخِرُ دَعْوَانِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ.
Brothers, sisters, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mufti Tosir Miah for dedicating some valuable time. He's been at it since December. December was our first course to do 4 entire days of coursework. I think all the credit goes to himself. We are setting up tables and bringing in food. I don't think that's work really, to be honest with you. So, Jazakallah for some kind words there. But I think just from ourselves, we'd like to present Mufti with a small gift, if that's okay with you, Mufti. We couldn't do anything huge, but I hope this will be useful for you. So if you can accept that gift from us, just as a goodwill gesture, I think you deserve it. So,